Today, we're going to talk about two of my favorite subjects, Scientology recruitment and conspiracy theories. Now, by Scientology recruitment, I don't mean getting people in to do their silly personality tests or sign up for their courses, but I mean the actual recruitment activities to get people to join Scientology staff or to sign a billion-year contract of commitment for Scientology's elite core group, the Sea Organization. We're actually going to concentrate on Sea Org recruitment specifically, but all the methods I'm going to describe here are used to a greater or lesser extent to recruit Scientologists for staff at local city-level churches as well. I'm pretty sure some of you watching this may find a lot of what I'm going to talk about unbelievable, but I swear it's all true. We really used to do this stuff, and as far as I know, Scientology recruiters still do. A lot of people think that the Xenu narrative is the most crazy part of Scientology, but I think you may change your mind after you hear all of this. Not every Scientologist falls for Hubbard's conspiracy theories, but most of them do. I haven't really gone into this whole topic in much detail until now. In March of 2014, just a couple of months after I'd been declared a suppressive person by the Church of Scientology for daring to think for myself, I was writing articles on Mike Rinder's blog, and one of those was called Sea Org Recruiters, the Ultimate Merchants of Chaos. According to L. Ron Hubbard, there are those who could be called merchants of chaos. These are people who want an environment to look very, very disturbing. These are people who gain some sort of advantage, they feel, if the environment is made to look more threatening. I'm going to review some parts of that article here and then greatly elaborate on them. Scientology does not hire people, it recruits them. The reason it does this is because Scientology is a money-making scam, which cons people with vague promises, half-truths, and some pretty whopping outright lies about its operations and what it will do for people who join up. The staff who work for Scientology are classified as religious volunteers, and therefore by law do not have to be paid anything for their time and energy, which just means more money is flowing up to the top. The staff don't realize the actual situation, and they think they're doing their work for altruistic reasons to help save mankind. So how do you get people in a frame of mind to do this, where they think Scientology is so important that they will put their own personal survival and livelihood on the line? I spent a year doing staff and Sea Org recruitment and worked with a couple of the most successful Sea Org recruiters on the planet. During that time, I learned a few things that you should know. Young Scientologists are the biggest pool of potential Sea Org recruits. Generally speaking, young Scientologists lack critical thinking skills and real-world experience, especially if they were raised in a Scientology household. Sea Org recruiters prey on this ignorance to convince the potential recruits that the Sea Org is the only answer to the world's problems. The way they do this is far more organized and methodical than you might imagine. Many years ago, one of the top SO recruiters put together a series of indoctrination steps, referred to within recruitment circles as the briefing. It's a PowerPoint presentation that contains various quotes from Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard about how there are only so many years left before the world implodes, and how Scientology, and specifically the Sea Org, is the only solution. Now the funny thing is that recently I found out that this recruiter actually is no longer in the Sea Org anymore, although he is still a hardcore believer in Scientology, but hopefully he'll eventually come around. With him no longer doing Sea Org recruitment, it's possible that things have changed a bit over the last couple of years since I left Scientology behind me, but I'm willing to bet it hasn't changed that much. Whether they still use this PowerPoint presentation is not actually the point of this video, because all the claims and beliefs that I'm going to talk about are still very much a part of the thinking of Scientologists at all levels, since they're based on L. Ron Hubbard's writings. The whole point of the briefing is to convince Scientologists that they are living in a matrix-like world of hidden dangers and covert conspiracies. Most people, even those with PhDs, do not understand the vast complexities of international banking, global politics, and worldwide media. A person could spend years learning about just one or two small parts of any of these subjects. It could be quite an ego boost if someone sat you down and in a few hours offered you a comprehensive overview that appeared to explain everything in easy-to-follow steps, and wrapped it all up with a solution to the whole mess. As I'll show you, conspiracy websites run by the likes of Alex Jones provide a very good living to professional conspiracy theorists, who prey on the gullibility of people who don't have critical thinking skills, not unlike doomsday cult leaders such as Marshall Applewhite of Heaven's Gate or Shoko Asahara of Aum Shinrikyo. Prior to 1967, Hubbard blamed Scientology's troubles mainly on opposition from psychiatry as a general body, only occasionally naming other specific people who were causing him trouble, such as Henry Luce, the old owner of Time magazine. With the release of Ron's Journal 67 and the formation of the Sea Org in 1967, Hubbard laid out in detail how he had uncovered a vast worldwide conspiracy of 12 international bankers, who were the primary source of attacks since Dianetics had been published. They used psychiatry, he said, as a tool to control populations and had their fingers in all kinds of pies, politically and financially, and used media channels to push their messages. There's a lot more to Hubbard's tales of persecution, which he continued to write about for years in various Scientology issues and in Freedom magazine articles. Say what you want about international bankers, and I'm certainly not implying that they're a bunch of good guys, but the information Hubbard published is full of logical inconsistencies, gross omissions of crucial information, half-truths, innuendo, and just plain lies. What the briefing represents is Sea Org members who have taken Hubbard's nonsense, found real-world information that appears to corroborate Hubbard's claims, and then put it all together in a package which leads to one inevitable conclusion. The world is going to hell in a handbasket, and Scientology is the only solution. Now, I didn't keep these PowerPoint presentations when I left the Sea Org, because they were closely guarded so they wouldn't get out into the hands of just any Scientologists, and certainly not the general public. I'd already figured out when I was still in that the briefing contained a lot of false and misleading information, and I stopped using it. In fact, that was sort of the beginning of my critical thinking. I encouraged a few others to do the same, but honestly, I didn't push too hard, because I was in a group who firmly believed that everything L. Ron Hubbard said was absolutely true, and I would have gotten in a lot of trouble if I'd tried to buck the system. It wasn't too much longer after that I left the Sea Org behind me forever at the end of 2012, and I never looked back. But I have to admit that for a good long time, I used to think that all of this nonsense was true, and I did recruit people into the Sea Org using it. I'm not proud of any of that. For this video, I put together from memory the key parts of the briefing and pulled as many of the Hubbard quotes as I could remember. It would take hours to go through the entire thing, and while many of you might find that interesting, I'm sure just as many of you would be bored to death if I tried. So, I'll just cover the highlights as best I can. First is the setup of how the world is a very dangerous place, being run by dark and ruthless forces who are bent on world domination, starting with eliminating the Church of Scientology, because it's the only thing that can stop their nefarious plans. And who's behind those shadowy forces? Let's start with L. Ron Hubbard's ramblings on this, first given to Scientologists in 1967.
With all of this action being taken against us in the last 17 years, I found, after the Southern African matter, that it was vitally necessary that I isolate who it was on this planet who was attacking us. The attacks were always of the same pattern. They always followed the same newspaper routes. They always used the same type of parliamentary member, and I thought that I had better look into this very thoroughly. The organization, under the direction of Mary Sue, employed, and actually had employed earlier than I returned from Southern Africa, employed several professional intelligence agents who had long and successful professional backgrounds, and they looked into this matter for us, and the results of their activities, although still in progress, have told us all that we needed to know with regard to any enemy we had on this planet. Our enemies on this planet are less than 12 men. They are members of the Bank of England and other higher financial circles. They own and control newspaper chains, and they are, oddly enough, directors in all the mental health groups in the world which have sprung up. Now, these chaps are very interesting fellows. They have fantastically corrupt backgrounds, illegitimate children, government graft, a very unsavory lot. And they apparently, sometime in the rather distant past, had determined upon a course of action. Being in control of most of the gold supplies of the planet, they entered upon a program of bringing every government to bankruptcy and under their thumb, so that no government would be able to act politically without their permission. The rest of their apparent program was to use mental health, which is to say psychiatric electric shock and prefrontal lobotomy, to remove from their path any political dissenters. They were the people behind the Siberia bill, which almost passed the House of Representatives in the United States and did pass, if I remember rightly, the Senate, which gave the power to any governor of any state in the United States simply to pick up anyone on the street and send him to Alaska. We defeated this Siberia bill and many other mental health quote-unquote acts of this character, but never really before knew from whom they were coming. Anyway, these fellows have gotten nearly every government in the world to owe them considerable quantities of money through various chicaneries, and they control, of course, income tax, government finance. Wilson, for instance, the current Premier of England, is totally involved with these fellows and talks about nothing else, actually. They organized these mental health groups which sprang up simultaneously all over the world, and anything that has mental health in it, as in its name, or mental hygiene or other things of that character, such names as that, are all part of the organization which stems from these less than a dozen, really, men.
So that is the basic structure of the global plot. I've never seen a complete list of all 12 of these characters, but later in this lecture, Hubbard identifies Cecil King as one of them and Sir William Carr as another. Basically, anyone who ever had anything to do with investigating or criticizing Scientology was a candidate for membership in this worldwide conspiracy. Hubbard spent quite some time writing about this in Freedom magazine, a publication he started in 1969, including an article about death camps he claimed were being set up around England and the United States. Here's a quote from that article with some more about Cecil King, as well as two more of the conspirators Hubbard brings into the mix: Lord Balliol, otherwise known as Robert Alexander Lindsay, and Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of the state of New York, and of course, member of the Rockefeller clan, infamous on almost every single conspiracy website. concerning Eli and other psychiatric death camps. The instigators of these death camps is a private psychiatric front group of which Lord Balneal is an officer. Kenneth Robinson, British Labour politician and Minister of Health under Harold Wilson from 64 to 68, was a director of it. Scientologists have found they instigate these death camps throughout the US and Commonwealth. They control large sections of governments and attack anyone who opposes their new fascist state. They seek the right to seize and kill any man, woman, or child who opposes them. Cecil King was one of them. He was to be the new Hitler in England. Immigration and health ministries were totally controlled by them throughout Commonwealth and US. Nelson Rockefeller, through his US Foundation, was to be the new Führer in the US. These people are merciless and seek to destroy any opposition with death camps. We are deep into the conspiracy now, but believe it or not, we're only touching on the tip of the iceberg. In the briefing, connections are also made to the Rothschilds, since they can easily be tied in to international banking, having practically invented the concept when Meyer Amschel Rothschild started his dynasty back in the 1700s and used his sons to establish the first international banking consortium in Europe. As related on Investopedia, the Rothschild fortune grew through ruthless exploitation of information. On July 18, 1815, a courier working for Rothschild informed the English government that Napoleon appeared to be suffering defeat at Waterloo. The English government, believing instead that they were losing the battle, dismissed the courier's report and believed it to be false information. At this point, with England's future seeming dire, Nathan Rothschild, third son of Meyer Rothschild, began selling all of his bonds, encouraging rumors that Napoleon had won and that English government paper would soon be worthless. Due to Rothschild's reputation as an influential, renowned, and respected investor, the panicked English public followed his lead. The mass selling resulted in a total collapse of the English stock exchange. It was then that Rothschild's agents began snatching up bonds and stock at record low prices. 2 days later, when Wellington's envoy confirmed that Napoleon Bonaparte had indeed suffered a crushing defeat, Nathan Rothschild was effectively in control of the English stock exchange. As of 2015, the English government was still paying back money owed to the Rothschild family from this Napoleonic maneuver. It's not difficult to see how with history like this, there could be a great deal of suspicion cast on the entire family over the last 200 years. But such dark speculation isn't really fair. While individuals in history have made bad choices and done evil things, to color all of Meyer's descendants with a brush of evil intention is no better than saying that because slavery was an approved practice in the 1800s, all white people today are racist butchers. You can believe that if you want, but it's obviously not true. This kind of thinking is one of the biggest problems with conspiracy theorists. They connect dots that don't really connect. Having a lot of money does not make a person automatically evil and bent on world destruction. Maybe the Rothschilds really are all evil, but if that's true, it's not because L. Ron Hubbard said so. Now, once the groundwork is laid in the briefing that this conspiracy exists and who some of the big players are, the next step is to cherry-pick history to find instances where they have tried to take control through cultural or economic influence. As the first step of this, we'd have the prospect watch a short video presentation by a man named David Icke called Problem, Reaction, Solution. I'm not putting that video here because I can just tell it to you much faster. The idea is that the conspirators want a given outcome, like the creation of a surveillance state in Britain or the US. In order to get that, they create a series of horrifying terrorist events. The terrorist attacks are the problem. The reaction is the predictable terror and rage the public feel over these acts. The solution is a surveillance state to protect everyone by spying on every aspect of their behavior 24 hours a day. If someone had just come in and said, "We want to spy on you all the time," no one would willingly have given over their right to privacy. But because of this problem that the conspirators created, everyone is all too willing to sign over their rights, and the conspirators win. Now, there are many problems with this way of thinking. First off, you can use this kind of logic to explain almost anything that goes wrong in the world through hindsight bias. I could use problem reaction solution to give you a conspiratorial reason behind almost any government policy or program by connecting some disaster to it. And as for the surveillance state conspiracy, we've all given up our right to a great deal of our privacy without any disaster at all, simply because we agreed to Facebook and Twitter's terms of service agreements. The degree we are under constant surveillance by marketing and advertising firms and the social media platforms we use every day goes far beyond the extent our collective governments are watching us. You know how I know that? Because who does the government have to subpoena when they want to get the goods on someone? Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon. If we were truly living under the Orwellian society the conspiracy theorists pretend we are, we'd all be in concentration camps by now. We also made very sure that no one saw David Icke's other videos about how the Queen of England and other world leaders are actually blood-drinking lizard people from another dimension. But it was very important in our briefing to not let our prospects think so critically about what we were dosing them with. We would indoctrinate them with Icke's video so that we could then walk them through a history lesson which would conclusively demonstrate that international bankers and the newly minted profession of psychiatry in the late 1800s were responsible for U.S. income tax, the eugenics movement in the early 1900s, the refinement of the American educational system in the 1920s, and the rise of Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, which Scientology believes was caused by psychiatry and not Adolf Hitler. Then we would come forward through false flag operations like the Gulf of Tonkin incident and show how 9/11 was an inside job. It was usually at this point in the briefing where we would take a break and have the person being recruited watch videos such as Zeitgeist, Loose Change, and Endgame. If you've never heard of these before, consider yourself lucky for having dodged a bullet. Zeitgeist is an unapologetically horrible propaganda piece created and narrated by Peter Joseph, which is broken down into 3 parts. 1, how Christian religion is a total lie based on earlier religious works. 2, how 9/11 was an inside job perpetrated by the United States government to implement Homeland Security and the surveillance state. And 3, the Federal Reserve System's inherent corruption and how global bankers manipulate world events for their own avarice and greed. While Joseph claims that this was never intended to be a documentary and instead was performance art, it has received tens of millions of views, been shared across social media platforms for years, and is a work of gospel for many conspiracy theorists. Despite numerous religious, economic, and civics experts, as well as media writers debunking almost every part of this film for its, shall we say, creative facts, the Zeitgeist movie actually spawned its own movement of followers, which continues to this day. Loose Change is another of these nonsensical documentaries which plays fast and free with anything resembling facts, and is heavily steeped in suggestion, innuendo, and coincidence to make the case that 9/11 was a false flag operation executed by the United States government. Even though there are gross and glaring inaccuracies throughout this so-called documentary, film marketer Corey Rowe has gone on record saying, "We don't ever come out and say that everything we say is 100%. We know there are errors in the documentary, and we've actually left them in there so that people discredit us and do the research for themselves." A year later, a 3rd edition of this movie came out, greatly expanded with Alex Jones on board as an executive producer, and yet another cut was made in 2009 and again in 2015. Like Zeitgeist, loose change has been debunked by experts across numerous professional fields who have pointed out its use of out-of-context quotes, shoddy research, creative facts, and out-of-date sources. Then there is Endgame, Blueprint for Global Enslavement, a 2007 documentary written and directed by Alex Jones. Now, if you want to see some of the most sensationalistic and insane ramblings of the conspiracy mindset, skip Zeitgeist and Loose Change and go straight to this one. The description of this film on Wikipedia is too good to not quote. In the film, director Jones reveals an alleged eugenics-obsessed group of global elite whose mission is the elimination of most of the Earth's population and the enslavement of the rest. He makes claims of a satanic international network steering planetary affairs for hundreds of years. He discusses his claim about the pseudoscientific eugenics being used by governments, Microsoft, and the band U2. You just can't make this stuff up, but Alex Jones sure can, and he gets paid a good amount of money to do it. And yes, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating outright that I think Alex Jones is in the market of fear-mongering and paranoia because it pays good money for him to peddle lies and fake news for his own personal aggrandizement. I also think it's despicable. I don't think making money is wrong, but I do think that creating fear with messages of a coming apocalypse and then selling people gold, water filters, survival gear, as well as more books and more DVDs selling more fear, is a pretty disgusting way to make a living. Apparently, he's worth at least $5 million, so that's a pretty good living he's making by scaring the hell out of people who can't seem to understand that he's taking advantage of them in the same way any destructive cult leader does. The methods Jones uses are the same. Now, we used to have prospective recruits watch these videos, which take something like 5 to 6 hours, precisely so they would induce fear and paranoia. We knew what we were doing, even if we ourselves happened to believe most of this nonsense too. This was done in order to provide a historical framework which showed that the plans of the global elites go back centuries, that from family member to family member, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Morgans and the De Beers have been working tirelessly to suppress the lower classes for only one reason: to create a slave society in which they are the masters and we are merely chattel for them to use and abuse. We would then show how international organizations, such as the United Nations, are actually front groups for these bankers to enforce their will, how they secretly meet each year under the guise of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the G6 Summit, and the Group of Eight. Despite the idea that these are clandestine meetings where secret plans are hatched, these meetings are actually now so hidden in plain sight that they have websites announcing when they're happening. It's funny in looking back at this because the one thing no one ever asked us when we were doing this briefing is, if these conspiracies are so far-reaching and have remained secret for so long, how do you guys know all about it? It's actually one of the key questions that no conspiracy theorist can logically answer. In order to actually work, all these nefarious plots and schemes would have to be kept secret. If everyone knows about them, they don't work so good. Now, because we were Scientologists, and L. Ron Hubbard had such an extremist hatred of psychiatry, we would tie all this back to that field. In order for any individual or group to take over a population, they have to have an army. Otherwise, they're just a bunch of old rich guys sitting around a table gabbing. Remember earlier I quoted Hubbard from 1967 when he said that psychiatrists were used to remove political dissenters. Here's how Hubbard said they fit into the bigger picture in a bulletin he wrote in 1970 called "The Psychiatrist at Work." The psychiatrist has masters. His principal organization, World Federation of Mental Health, and its members, the National Associations of Mental Health, the American Psychiatric Association, and the American Psychological Association are directly connected to Russia. Even the British Broadcasting Company has stated that psychiatry and the KGB, Russian secret police, operate in direct collusion. A member of the WFMH sits on every major advisory council of the US government, to name one government. Ministers of health or health authorities are members of the National Association or the WFMH. We then show diagrams of how all the media is controlled by a small group of megacorporations, so everything that we see and hear on media channels is just a facade of free press and journalistic integrity. Since only a small number of corporations own all this media, that must mean that every reporter and editor is marching in lockstep to whatever the CEOs of these groups tell them to do, right? Obviously. So when you combine this whole picture, here's what you get. The 12 men and their successors and family members rule the world from their enclaves at the very top, deciding on what direction the governments of the world will follow, always ensuring that no matter what, they are amassing more money, resources, and power. The media, meaning all news and entertainment companies, are owned or indirectly controlled by the elite and produce PR campaigns, movies, television shows, and music which indoctrinate people in whatever attitudes or ideas the elite want them to be thinking, while the news media keeps people distracted with meaningless current events that on the surface appear to inform the public what's going on, but really just obfuscate the true agenda of the elites. Education has been subverted to become a propaganda arm of the elites, who have dumbed down learning requirements and educational standards so people are more docile, accepting of their position as workers and their place in the economic framework the elites control. Psychiatry is the enforcement arm of the elites, used to forcibly institutionalize or involuntarily commit anyone who gets out of line. Once safely imprisoned in psychiatric hospitals or private prisons, psychiatrists are then free to lobotomize or otherwise do away with any political or social dissenters. The lower and middle classes have been so indoctrinated throughout their entire lives that they not only are subject to this oppressive control system, but actually feed and support it with their tax dollars, hard work, and belief in their sham political leaders. They are too brainwashed to realize what is actually going on. Now, by this point, the recruiters have basically scared the shit out of the person and convinced them that their entire life has been lived in the Matrix. They've been plugged into a system which denies them any human rights or individuality or freedom. They have never been in control of anything they're doing or thinking. They are all but powerless to do anything against this vast and overwhelming conspiracy. But that is when we offer them one piece of hope. We then tell them that now that they know this, they have to do something about it. The recruiter uses a bit of Scientology here called the KRC triangle. KRC stands for knowledge, responsibility, and control. Hubbard claimed that if you want to get more control over something, you need to take more responsibility for it and or get more knowledge about it. That makes the triangle grow. Conversely, if you get more knowledge about something, you then have the potential to control it more and be more responsible for it. You see how this works. So what the recruiter does is ensnare the prospect by saying that now that they have more knowledge about the big picture, if they don't up their responsibility, then they could lose that knowledge and lose their ability to control things. This is ridiculous if you think about it for a minute, and you can poke all kinds of logic holes in this KRC triangle, but Scientologists don't question L. Ron Hubbard. The recruiters and the prospects all believe this KRC triangle is how things work. The recruiter then gives the prospect one and only one way to take responsibility. Join the C organization now. They're shown a series of misleading photographs and doctored statistics that prove Scientology is expanding successfully and taking control of whole regions. It's then made absolutely imperative that the prospect join immediately. Without giving any real specifics as to what the Sea Org is actually doing to prevent any of this, a picture is painted that merely by the Sea Org's very presence, this worldwide suppression will be shattered. Falling in line with the KRC triangle, the prospect is told in no uncertain terms that it is their responsibility to save the world. They even tell the prospect that those who become aware of this information and don't act on it, one for one end up on the skids and destitute. Lines are used such as, "There was this one guy who I briefed and he didn't join, and I found out a few months later that the guy was on drugs, totally crashed out." You don't want that to happen to you. You need to take responsibility for what you know. They're then fed a bunch of quotes from L. Ron Hubbard to convince them that the Sea Org is the only sensible thing they can do. It is possibly a bit above your reality to say that we intend to salvage this sector. No one has been able to do it for 75 million years. We are the first. We have a great deal of future in front of us in Dianetics and Scientology. The way to attain that future is to somehow or another attempt to work as a team against the forces which oppose progress, culture, and civilization to achieve a better Earth. Not to fight each other or engage in activities which claw each other's eyes out, but to all of us get ourselves above the level of having to fight, and then enjoying a good fight as a team against any force which oppose the progress of man. Civilization is successful only because it is a team. The individual in our present society has a rough time. We are a team. We have a big job to do. We need everyone aboard. The job that we do out over the world is unbelievable. We actually are not up to a point where the world even has an idea that anybody could do anything about it or straighten it out in any way. We're actually 3 feet behind the world's head, and we're handling technology which is far, far beyond the ordinary level of technology which man has. When you add all this up, the Sea Org has evolved itself into a very successful activity, and it is a very vital and necessary activity. If we win, you will win. The kids in school will grow up, and we'll have a world without criminality, without war. We mean it, and the only slim chance this planet has rests on a few slim shoulders, overworked, underpaid, and fought, the Scientologist. Later on, if we make it, what will be your answer to this question? Did you help? In this minute particle of time, we have the opportunity to reverse the downward spiral of life. While pushing these Hubbardisms on the prospects, the Sea Org recruiters will then go all in to get the person to sign up. Their attitude is that there is no other choice, nothing else is important, and to hell with anything else going on in your life. Here's some lines taken from a Sea Org recruitment video so you can see how they go for closing the deal. OT levels were given to the Sea Org to deliver by LRH. Without the Sea Org, there's no OT levels. There's no cleared planet. If you get enough Sea Org members, you'll make more OTs, you'll clear the planet. The Sea Org is the guys who are there, who are making sure it all happens. You know, at the end of the day, they're the ones who are ultimately responsible for it. And whether we handle it, whether we make it, etc., it's going to be down to the Sea Org. And it's going to be down to how many people actually decided, you know what, I need to do this. The Sea Org is an adventure. It's, if you want, lots of energy, many challenges, lots of different things to accomplish, then you should join the Sea Org. It's fast moving, it's tough, it's dedicated, but it's also a hell of a lot of fun. And when you're operating on a purpose level that you're doing in the Sea Org, and at the same time operating in an extremely intense and adventurous way, I mean, that's living. One last bit I'll mention here is that a crucial aspect of the recruiter's methodology is to ensure that the prospect is isolated from his parents, spouse, or anyone else who might try to convince the prospect that he doesn't need to join. He's told that the special confidential briefing puts him in a secret information loop that only a few elite Sea Org members are aware of. This makes it much easier for the prospect to then discount the concerns of their loved ones, who obviously don't know what they're talking about, when they try to convince the prospect that dropping out of college, quitting their job, leaving their fiancé, or whatever else the recruiters are saying is absolutely ridiculous. Sea Org recruiters not only do this briefing, but will then sit for hours working a person over, telling them that any plans they had for their lives, such as going to college or even having a family and kids, are worthless and not what they should be doing. They won't take no for an answer and relentlessly try to push a pen into the prospect's hand and get him or her to sign the billion-year contract of commitment. It usually takes the prospect literally getting up and walking out or forcefully telling the recruiters he does not want to talk to them anymore before they will stop. There are tons more details and bits and pieces of all this I could elaborate on, but I think this video has gone on long enough and certainly has given the flavor of what Scientology recruitment is like. It's grueling, it's intimidating, and it's relentless. Sea Org recruiters are amongst the most convincing, smooth-talking, and charismatic merchants of chaos you will ever encounter. Whether they believe their own lies or not is immaterial. It's a fact that they spend all day, every day, weaving tales of terror to beguile and amaze unsuspecting Scientologists and convince them that the Sea Org is the world's only salvation. I recruited 11 people into the Sea Org during my stint as a recruiter. Most of them, I believe, have made it out of the Sea Org now, and I can't tell you how thankful I am for that. I hope that by making this information public, it may help any parents or concerned loved ones out there to make sure their friends and family do not involve themselves in Scientology. The Sea Org is not an organization you want your loved ones joining. This also should help give you a better idea of just how far down the rabbit hole Scientology beliefs are about the world around us. Thank you for watching.